In my piece, Pioseneczka, I try to create and curate a specific sonic environment, navigating through really slow, deliberately slow structures of sound. What I was interested in was reflecting on the relationship between the fragmentation of sound and the form and structure and the linearity and long durations, specifically looking not for the differences but the points of connection between them. Because I wanted to realize slow, deliberately muffled sonic structures, I chose quite economical and fragmented verticality and instrumentation. I was also asking myself about the act of a performance, act of playing an instrument. What is the laziest way one could bow? What is the laziest way and the most economical way one could hold a finger on a keyboard? In this piece, I also decided to use field recordings in a very deliberately also fragmented way. The first field recording I ever made, it was the day when I moved to Vilnius and was passing through the streets of the city that I yet didn't know and heard a really interesting yet loud prayer in Polish. That was why I decided to use this field recording, although I never record them. To this day, this field recording is the only one I made. And since I do not live in Vilnius anymore, I decided it is quite symbolic as I came back here to come back and look at my limited sound library and integrate it into the piece, into the deliberately slow and fragmented structures.
My name is Jack. I'm a composer and a conductor from Manchester. My piece is called On, and it's called On because a lot of the piece is interrupted by these sudden stops where the sound completely stops and then suddenly starts again afterwards. There's this sort of very atmospheric kind of flowing sound world that is constantly being cut into, like you're playing a sampler and you're just turning the music on and off in quite an unpredictable way. One of the most important sounds of the piece, or one of the most important aspects of the piece, is the approach to singing or not quite singing, which is kind of closer to mumbling than singing. I'm really interested in half-formed speech, which is not quite legible, not quite correct, not quite even speaking. You know, you can kind of, you read what somebody is emoting through the timbre and the contour and the character of the voice rather than any fully formed words. But rather than mumbling being, just nonsense, you can often tell that there is language there, just sort of buried beneath, some kind of decay almost of legibility. So that's what I wanted to really explore in the piece, and the singers mostly they find a sound halfway between mumbling and singing in a more traditional choral style, and there's no words in the piece, just mouth shapes that they all create together, which Melos do really well, and it sounds really special, I think. the instruments, they definitely kind of, I guess, reflect this uncertainty in the sound that is always present when somebody mumbles. The cello is kind of buried underneath a mute and is detuned. All of the keyboards and the electronics are very soft and blending in with the percussion. It kind of sounds like vinyl crackle or cassette tape noise. It's all very subtle and liminal and not projected or expressed kind of overtly or clearly to you as a listener.
The composition that I wrote for Melos Ensemble and Apartment House is called Still. Still is a moment, not a moving picture, but a very frozen moment, or can also mean a continuation without no change, or a moment, a process of quieting. Since I worked and was one of the founders of the ensemble and worked together as a curator for the 8 last years, and this piece actually being the first composition that I write for the Melos Ensemble. And for me, it was very important to compose a piece that somehow reflects this essence of Melos. I see it being as a very vulnerable and very, at the same time, very strong female energy. And having this goal of creating this energy, I chose to work on few levels. The first layer would be the text that I chose, to work with the text by the poet Sylvia Plath from her book Ariel that she wrote at approximately the same age that most of the Melos singers are now as well. This text is very vulnerable and creates beautiful breathing nature images. However, it also holds this feeling of loneliness that I hope is also present in the composition itself. On a structural, compositional level, the piece is based on format analysis of the Melos singers. With a colleague, Anna Mali, we analyzed and extracted harmonies, 8 first formats of the singers. And this also allows another beautiful insight, which for me was also very important, the individuality of the voice. Where in choir, in any ensemble, the biggest value somehow is to sound as one. However, format analysis really allows and shows that this is impossible, and this individuality is present in the harmonic language of Still.
My name is Anna Mali. I am computer music composer, and I did this collaboration with Juta. We met us in Graz. For Still, I did a very detailed format analysis. Formants are the most important frequencies of a vowel. And the vowel depends on the position of the mouth, on the mouth cavity and on the tongue. So the mouth is a filter. I analyzed the 8 vowels of each Melos singer. This resulted in 64 chords, and I gave those to Juta, and she composed this wonderful piece with it. And the electronics are also built up on these chords. I used shimmering sine waves and narrowband filters. So this idea of formants and filters and mouth and singers is very consistent. What I really like about the piece is that you find this idea everywhere. You find it in the singers, in the chord progression, in the analysis, in the electronics, in the sounds. And this makes sense as a whole.
Very, very original musical idea for this piece required the presence of electronics. on the one hand, very slow-moving glissandes that are impossible to perform for humans, and on the other hand, the microtonal chords and harmonies, which would not be possible to perform for humans. However, these frequencies and harmonies are extracted from the human voices, from the voices of the mellow singers themselves.